Hey everybody, how's it going? The title of this video might be a little controversial. You might be thinking to yourself, Andy, what's wrong with you? How can you put the Beatles and the Beach Boys in even the same category? The Beatles are far and away a better band. What's wrong with you? How could you possibly put the two next to each other and think that there's a comparison there? Well, I'm not arguing the Beatles are a bad band. In fact, I have nothing but respect for the Beatles. You know, they have written some of the greatest songs ever composed, bar none, in history. What I am arguing for, though, is that maybe the Beach Boys aren't getting the respect they deserve. And just hear me out, and maybe I can change some minds. The band consisted of three brothers, Brian, Carl, and Dennis, their cousin, Mike Love, and their high school friend, Al Jardine. So the five of them got together and formed this band. Now, Brian, Dennis, and Carl's father was named Murray, and he decided that he was going to be the band's manager. He had had some marginal success as a recording artist a couple decades earlier, so he had some contacts and got him signed to a label. The problem with Murray Wilson is that he wasn't that nice of a guy. That's kind of an understatement. He was a jerk. When they made the Beach Boys made-for-TV movie back in the 90s, Brian Wilson said that when he dies in the story, if the audience stands up and cheers, you've portrayed him correctly. Yeah, he was kind of a jerk. He actually, when Brian was 2 years old, he hit Brian in the head on purpose, to the extent that Brian is deaf in one ear to this day. So he composed all these very intricate melodies and instrumentations while only having the hearing in one ear, which is fantastic. But moving on. The Beach Boys wrote songs basically about three things: cars, girls, and surfing. And I'm not going to lie to you, I'm not going to be a fanboy and tell you everything they wrote was great, because a lot of what they wrote was crap. The band has said that the song Barbara Ann is one of their most hated songs. They hate that song so much because they don't feel like it's really using their potential, and it's just this cheesy money-making song. But the fans love it, so they play it for the fans because they really respect their fans. Anyways, you can kind of get a hint that, well, the band's creative driving force was Brian Wilson, and you can kind of get glimpses of his creative genius on their 1964 album, Summer Days and Summer Nights. So that you can kind of get a few glimpses on that album, a few songs here and there. Then they release this album here, Beach Boys Today. And, you know, the first side is pretty standard stuff, although they're good songs. It includes When I Grew Up to Be a Man, which is one of my favorite songs of all time, and Help Me Rhonda. But side two of this album just really, Brian shows off how he's grown as a songwriter and as a musician. And it's just a fantastic half of an album. The first side isn't bad, but it's a little more commercial. The second side is just dripping with Brian's potential. So then, Brian Wilson heard the album Rubber Soul by the Beatles. And he said to himself, wow, the Beatles took one album and said something in one album. The whole record was around one central idea, and every song kind of lent itself to that central idea. That's brilliant. I want to write an album like that. I want to write the best pop album ever made. Because Brian was a really competitive guy, and he was always keeping an eye on the Beatles. So he sent the rest of the band on tour. In fact, they were touring in Japan for a few months while he wrote Pet Sounds. Now, he wrote the lyrics, and he collaborated with some friends, and he wrote this fantastic album, Pet Sounds. Now, this album has got some really high praise. Paul McCartney called this album his favorite pop album of all time. In fact, he said that Wouldn't It Be Nice is probably his favorite song ever written. Going even further, Paul McCartney one Christmas bought all three of his kids, I think he's got 3 kids, he bought each of his kids a copy of Pet Sounds and told them, you don't know what good music is until you've heard this album. It is a beautiful album. It's so many upbeat songs about so many very sad things. The problem with the Beach Boys was that they didn't know when to quit. I mean, the Beatles, you know, they went out with a bang. They did their concert on top of the roof, and they said, you know, here we go, we hope we passed our audition. And, you know, that's a classy way to leave the music scene. The Beach Boys did not know when to quit. The Pet Sounds era is when Brian Wilson was starting to get into drugs, and mental illness started kicking in for him, and yeah, so he battled that for the longest time while the rest of the band kept going, trying to make records. And if you ever see a Beach Boys album in a store, you have a 50-50 chance it's either going to be really good or it's going to be terrible, because they wrote some terrible albums. And that's why I firmly believe that the Beatles are a better band. They did more for the world. They did more for history and for music. But this back and forth between the Beach Boys, Brian heard Rubber Soul and wrote Pet Sounds. John, Paul, George, and Ringo heard Pet Sounds and decided that they needed to write an album, and they came up with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. This back and forth between these two bands, I think, has really done nothing but strengthen the music all around. I think part of the reason why I love the Beach Boys so much is because this is something I used to listen to with my dad all the time growing up. No matter what was going on in our house, whether I liked it or not, the Beach Boys was in the background. And they were always just, in my mind, very happy, upbeat songs that were catchy to listen to. But now that I'm a little older and I can kind of appreciate what they're about, they're such beautifully deep songs, and some of them are just, you can really understand what Brian's going through. And maybe Pet Sounds specifically is such an important album to me is because Brian wrote this when he was 23 years old. And the album is about the transition from being a boy to being a man, and being terrified and not knowing what you're doing, and just the pain and the bumps along the way of coming of age. And look, that's exactly where I am right now. So I can really identify with a lot of what he's talking about in this album. Now, my younger brother is named Brian. Yeah, my father named my younger brother Brian, after Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. I'm a little jealous to this day of that. I got stuck with Andrew, but yeah. No, I like my name, but it would have been so cool to be named after Brian Wilson. I mean, come on. So that's basically my love for the Beach Boys. I'd love to hear in your comments, what do you think? I mean, I think the general consensus is that the Beatles are a better band, but do you have any strong feelings about? Tell me about your favorite band, or about how much you like the Beatles, or maybe even you'll agree with me in saying that Pet Sounds and Beach Boys Today are fantastic albums in their own right. So thank you guys all for listening. I appreciate you going with me on this rant, and I will talk to you all very soon. Thanks, guys. Bye.